The night wind carried the smell of gunpowder and blood when Lena stumbled out of the brush, her torn dress clinging to her like a second skin. The desert air, sharp and dry, whipped across her bare shoulders, stinging where the lashes had broken her skin. She half fell, half crawled toward the small circle of firelight ahead, her breath ragged, her voice no stronger than the whisper of leaves. "Just cover me with clothes quick," she said, words cracking as if they'd been dragged over broken glass. The Apache warrior froze. Tazhi had been sitting cross-legged by his fire, sharpening the edge of his knife when her figure emerged from the darkness. His eyes, trained to see danger even in shadows, caught the shape of her trembling form before she stepped into the light. And in that moment, the steel in his hand stilled. She looked like a ghost dragged out of the underworld. Her face was pale, dirt streaking her cheeks, lips cracked, hair matted with sweat and dust. The moonlight behind her painted her in silver, but the firelight ahead revealed the bruises, ugly purple welts across her arms, the tear in her dress that exposed ribs that rose and fell too fast, and worst of all, the fear that clung to her like a second skin. Tazhi's breath deepened. He rose without a word, his height casting a long shadow over her. The warrior's chest, bare and bronzed by the fire's glow, moved with the steadiness of a man who had seen too much of both life and death. But his dark eyes softened when they landed on her trembling hands, clutching the torn fabric of her dress, desperate for dignity, desperate for warmth. He didn't ask her who she was. He didn't demand her story. Instead, he pulled the wool blanket from his shoulders, the same blanket that had been his shield, against the desert night and wrapped it around her. His movements were deliberate, careful, almost reverent, as though she were not a broken woman but something fragile and sacred. When the warmth of the fabric touched her, Lena's whole body shook. She let out a choked sound, half sob, half gasp. Her fingers clenched the edges of the blanket and pressed it tight to her chest, as if she were drowning and the wool was the only rope keeping her afloat. Tazhi lowered himself until his eyes met hers. He studied her, the way a hunter studies the wind, and in her face he read the story she couldn't yet tell. The cuts on her skin spoke of a whip. The bruises across her collarbones spoke of hands that had tried to break her. The fear in her eyes, wild, darting like a cornered animal, spoke of men who had shown no mercy. For a long heartbeat, the fire crackled between them, the silence heavy, carrying all that had not been said. Then his voice came low and steady, thick with promise. "They'll pay for this." The words didn't thunder. They didn't need to. They slipped into the night with the weight of a vow, binding as stone, final as a death sentence. Lena stared at him, lips parted, as if she couldn't believe a stranger, an Apache warrior of all people, would make her pain his own. She wanted to speak, but the weight of exhaustion dragged her down. She sank to her knees beside the fire, clutching the blanket tighter, her body folding in on itself like a bird battered by storm. Tazhi did not touch her again, not even to steady her. Instead, he added another branch to the fire, coaxing the flames higher to fight the creeping cold. The light spilled over her battered frame, making her look less like a ghost and more like a woman still tethered to life. He sat a few paces away, knife still in hand, but his attention was not on the blade. It was on her, this broken stranger who had stumbled out of the night carrying wounds carved by other men. For Tazhi, the world was full of scars. His people had their land stolen, their children torn from them, their homes burned. Pain was no stranger to him. But this seeing a woman bloodied, stripped of her dignity, begging only for clothing to hide her shame lit a fire in him deeper than any war drum. He didn't yet know her name. He didn't yet know who had done this. But he knew this much. They would pay. And as the desert night howled around them, two lives, one broken, one unyielding, sat by the same fire, the promise of retribution binding them together in silence. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert, painting the jagged cliffs in shades of copper and rose. Lena sat slumped against a fallen log, her body wrapped tightly in Tazhi's blanket. The fabric smelled of smoke and sage, a strange comfort against the memory of rough hands and cruel laughter. Every breath she took rattled in her chest, as though each lungful of air might be her last. Her eyes darted to every shadow, every shift of sand, the creak of settling stone. Fear clung to her bones, refusing to loosen its grip. She pulled the blanket tighter, though the morning air was already warming. "They came from the town," she rasped finally, her voice raw and broken. Tazhi crouched in front of her, silent, waiting. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes, dark as obsidian, burned with an intensity that urged her to keep speaking. 3 men. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "They said I owed them for the land my father left me. I told them no, that the land is mine, that I'd rather starve than give it away. When I refused..." Her words faltered, collapsing under the weight of what followed. She turned her head away, but the bruises across her face told the story anyway. Tazhi's jaw tightened. He didn't press her. He didn't need to. "You fought back," he said, his tone more a statement than a question. Something flickered in Lena's eyes, something fiery, defiant, buried beneath layers of pain. Her lip curled despite the split across it. "I bit one so hard," he screamed like a mule. For the briefest second, Tazhi's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. But it didn't reach his eyes. The fire inside him burned hotter, darker, and Lena could feel it radiating from him like the heat of the rising sun. She lowered her gaze to her hands, pale and trembling against the rough wool of the blanket. "I thought they'd kill me. Part of me wanted them to. At least then it would be over." The words hung between them, heavy as lead. Tazhi leaned closer, his voice low, a steady current against the storm raging inside her. "You are not dead. That matters." Lena let out a bitter laugh, though it caught in her throat and turned into a cough. "Matters to who? I've got no family left. The town won't raise a hand for me. And the land," she bit her lip until blood welled. "The land is all I have, and they're trying to take even that." The Apache warrior studied her for a long moment. His people, too, had known the theft of land, the weight of betrayal. His gaze softened, though his voice carried the sharp edge of truth. "The land remembers kindness. The land remembers cruelty. Those men, they will not be forgotten." Lena looked at him sharply, almost disbelieving. The firelight of the night before seemed to echo in his words now. A quiet vow woven into the fabric of the desert itself. "You speak as if the ground cares what happens," she said. Tazhi single quotes, his eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the sun was climbing over the ridges, flooding the canyon with light. "The ground always cares. Every step leaves a mark. Every drop of blood stains more than skin. What was done to you, what was tried, has already changed this place." He looked back at her, his gaze fierce, unwavering. "And it has changed me." The words unsettled her, but not in the way she expected. For the first time since the attack, Lena felt something stir inside her chest, a flicker of strength, fragile but alive. Still, doubt coiled around her like a snake. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Tazhi straightened, his shadow falling across her as he rose. "I don't need to." His voice was quiet but carried the weight of iron. "I know what was done." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Lena turned her head and closed her eyes, the sound of wings beating against the vast sky somehow anchoring her. She didn't trust easily. Not anymore. But something in Tazhi's words burrowed past her defenses, planting itself in the cracks of her broken spirit. For the first time since she had staggered bleeding through the desert, Lena allowed herself to breathe, without fear that the next moment would be her last stop, and though she would never have admitted it aloud, the thought came unbidden as she gripped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she believed. By the time the sun was high, Lena's lips were cracked, her skin pale beneath the smears of dirt and blood. Her body shivered despite the warmth of the desert day, and Tazhi knew she wouldn't last if he left her as she was. Without a word, he helped her to her feet. She staggered, legs trembling, but his strong hand at her elbow steadied her. He guided her toward a narrow canyon where he knew a river still flowed, a lifeline hidden between sandstone walls. The walk was slow, each step pulling a sharp breath from Lena. Her boots scuffed against rock and sand, and twice she nearly collapsed. Tazhi never hurried her. He moved with a patience born of long trails and long battles, adjusting his pace until hers matched. When she stumbled, his arm was there, solid and sure. At last they reached the river. The canyon walls rose high, casting cool shadows over the rippling water. The air smelled of stone and sagebrush, a clean sharpness that banished the sour scent of blood. Lena sank to her knees at the bank, dipping her hands into the cold water. The shock made her gasp, but then she cupped the water to her mouth and drank greedily, drops running down her chin. Her eyes closed, as if the simple taste of river water was the sweetest thing she had ever known. Tazhi knelt beside her. He dipped a strip of cloth into the stream, wrung it out, and touched it gently to the bruises on her face. Lena flinched, her breath hitching. "You don't have to," she muttered, turning her head. "I've been through worse." His hand didn't waver. "You bleed," he said calmly, "so I stop it." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The blunt simplicity of his words silenced her. Slowly, she let him clean the blood from her skin. His touch was careful, almost reverent. He washed the dirt from her shoulders, traced the lash marks across her back with the wet cloth, and rinsed the blood from her wrists where rope had burned her. He did it all without pity, in his eyes only respect. Still, Lena's pride bristled. "You shouldn't bother with me," she said after a while, her voice sharp to hide the tremor beneath it. "I'm nothing but trouble." Tazhi stilled, the cloth dripping water back into the stream. He lifted her chin gently until her eyes were forced to meet his. His voice was low, steady, unyielding. "The land remembers kindness. The land remembers cruelty. Those men marked you with cruelty, but I have marked you with kindness. Which one do you think will last longer?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but the conviction in his words struck something deep inside her. No one had spoken to her like that before. Not in town, not on her father's land, not ever. For a moment she felt like more than a broken body, more than a victim wrapped in bruises. She felt like a woman whose spirit was worth saving. She turned her face back to the water, afraid of how much his words stirred in her. Tazhi rinsed the cloth again, dipping it into the river. "The river remembers too," he said quietly. "It carries away what does not belong. Tonight, it carries away your pain." Lena let out a shaky laugh. "Pain doesn't wash off so easy." He wrung out the cloth, the water dripping in rhythmic beats against stone. "Then we wash until it does." The canyon was silent except for the murmur of the river and the soft rustle of wind through sagebrush. Lena leaned forward, letting the water lap over her hands, her wrists, her arms. For the first time in days, she felt clean. Not whole, never whole, but clean enough to breathe without choking on the memory of hands and blows. She sat back, the blanket still around her shoulders, though damp now from the spray of the river. Her eyes softened, though her voice was still guarded. "Why?" Tazhi tilted his head. "Why what? Why help me? You fight for your people. I'm not one of them. Why risk fighting for me?" His jaw tightened. He thought of treaties broken, homes burned, the women of his people taken or killed without mercy. He thought of scars that ran deeper than flesh, because hurt is the same in every tongue, he said finally, and because I cannot watch another woman be broken. The words hung heavy in the air. Lena pressed her lips together, staring at the water as if afraid to look at him. But deep in her chest, a fragile warmth stirred, foreign and frightening. For the first time since the night she'd been taken, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like maybe, just maybe, someone cared if she survived. By the time the sun began to sink, the canyon walls glowed like burnished copper. Shadows stretched long and deep across the sand, and the river that had carried away Lena's blood now whispered softly, its surface glinting in the fading light. Tazhi built a fire against the canyon wall, his hands steady, practiced. He arranged the stones in a neat ring, placed dry sagebrush at the center, then coaxed flame from flint and steel until sparks leapt and grew into a small, steady blaze. The firelight flickered across his bare chest, the tribal beads and bones that hung against his skin catching the glow like stars caught in a web. Lena sat a few feet away, wrapped in his blanket, knees drawn up beneath her chin. The warmth of the fire reached her, but she couldn't seem to shake the chill that clung to her bones. She watched him in silence, studying the way he moved, every gesture deliberate, calm, yet charged with an energy that made the air around him feel alive. When he settled onto the ground opposite her, the fire between them, she finally spoke. "You fight for your people," she said softly. Her voice was steadier than it had been that morning, but there was still a quiver at the edges. "Why risk fighting for me?" Tazhi's gaze lifted to hers. The flames danced in his dark eyes, but his expression was unreadable. For a moment, the only sound was the pop of resin in the firewood. He thought of the raids, of soldiers who broke promises with the stroke of a pen, of women and children driven from their homes or left to bleed in the dust. He thought of the years he had carried those memories like stones inside his chest. "Because hurt is the same in every tongue," he said at last. His voice was low, steady, as if the words were carved from rock. "And because I cannot watch another woman be broken." The fire cracked between them, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Lena lowered her gaze, staring at the firelight licking the wood. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Men in town had called her stubborn, difficult, cursed for trying to hold on to her father's land. Some had tried to tame her, others to silence her. But none had looked at her wounds and seen more than weakness. Her throat tightened. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders, not just for warmth, but for comfort. "You don't know what they did," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know enough," Tazhi replied. His tone carried no pity, only certainty. She looked up, eyes searching his face. "And if they come again?" Tazhi leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The firelight cast his features in sharp relief, strong jaw, long black hair falling loose around his shoulders, the cords of muscle shifting beneath his bronzed skin. His eyes never left hers. "Then they will find me waiting," he said simply. Lena's breath caught. There was no boast in his voice, no arrogance, just fact. As sure as the rising of the sun, silence fell again, heavy and strange. Lena shifted, her body aching, but inside her chest, something unexpected flickered. For the first time since the attack, she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel like prey. Sitting across from this man, she felt seen. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "You'll risk your life for someone you don't even know." Tazhi's expression softened, though his eyes remained fierce. "The earth does not ask your name before it gives you water. Fire does not ask before it gives you warmth." "Why should I?" The word struck her like a hammer against glass, cracking the walls she had built around her heart. She swallowed hard, turning her face to the canyon wall to hide the tears burning at the corners of her eyes. The night deepened. Stars pricked the sky above, a scatter of silver dust across velvet black. The fire cast long shadows that danced against stone, while the river whispered its eternal song. For the first time in days, Lena allowed her body to relax. She lay on her side near the fire, the blanket tucked beneath her chin, her eyes half closed. Exhaustion tugged at her, but her ears still caught every sound, the steady crackle of fire, the murmur of the river, the faint rustle as Tazhi shifted his weight. She opened her eyes just enough to see him. He sat upright, knife resting across his knees, his gaze fixed outward toward the canyon's mouth. His long hair stirred gently in the night wind, his body still as carved stone, his presence both guardian and sentinel. Her chest ached at the sight. She had lost everything, her father, her safety, her trust in the world. Yet here, in the fire's glow, with an Apache warrior watching over her like an unyielding shield, Lena felt something she thought she'd never feel again. Safe. The thought slipped into her mind as sleep finally claimed her, and though her dreams were still shadowed by memory, a fragile thread of hope wove through them, binding her spirit to the man who had promised that those who hurt her would pay. 2 days had passed since the river had washed the worst of Lena's blood from her skin, but her muscles still ached and her body trembled with fatigue. The canyon was quiet, almost too quiet, when a distant sound reached her ears, the clatter of hooves against stone, the faint crunch of sand under leather boots. Her heart thudded violently. She pulled the blanket tighter, pressing herself closer to Tazhi's side. He sensed her fear immediately. "They're coming," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. Tazhi's dark eyes narrowed. He rose, towering over her, his bare chest taut, the muscles beneath shifting like coiled springs. Tribal jewelry glimmered faintly in the sunlight, catching every movement. He picked up his bow and a single arrow, the obsidian tip reflecting the harsh light of the canyon walls. "Stay behind me," he said calmly. But with an edge of command that left no room for argument. Lena nodded, hard hammering, as 3 riders appeared at the canyon's edge, their figures small but unmistakable. They laughed and called out, their voices echoing like cruel ghosts against the stone walls. "Look what we have here," one shouted, dismounting, boots crunching against gravel. "Our runaway wench has found herself a savage protector." Lena's stomach turned, and her hands clenched the blanket. Her eyes darted to Tazhi, who stood like a mountain of shadow and muscle. Unflinching, the riders advanced cautiously, weapons drawn. But it was clear they underestimated the man before them. Tazhi moved first. His arrow sliced through the air with deadly precision, striking the first man's shoulder. He screamed, the sound tearing across the canyon, and collapsed. The second lunged forward, blade glinting. Lena's breath caught, and instinct overrode fear. She grabbed a jagged rock and swung with all the fury pent up from days of terror. The man stumbled, blood streaking his temple, and cursed, staggering backward. Tazhi didn't flinch. He moved like water, silent, fluid, and precise. His knife flashed in the sunlight, cutting the third man's rein in half and forcing him to skid to a halt. "You'll answer," Tazhi growled, eyes dark as storm clouds, "for every mark you left on her." Lena's gaze shifted between them, heart pounding. Despite the fear, a strange surge of determination pulsed through her veins. She was no longer entirely helpless. The man before her, the warrior who had saved her, was more than enough of a shield. Dust rose in the canyon as the fight continued. Tazhi's arrow found the first man again, pinning him to the ground. The second man tried to recover, but Lena's rock swung again, connecting solidly, and he crumpled, groaning. The third finally tried to run, spurred by fear, but Tazhi was faster. His knife came up, pressing against the man's chest, stopping him cold. "You will never touch her again," Tazhi said, voice like thunder. His eyes burning with a fire that mirrored the desert sun. For a moment, the canyon was silent except for the crackle of dust and the heavy breathing of the two survivors. Lena sank to the ground, heart racing, muscles trembling from adrenaline. Her chest heaved as she stared at Tazhi, who stood over the fallen man. His long black hair whipping in the wind, chest bare and glistening with sweat. "You could have left me," she whispered, almost disbelief in her voice. Tazhi lowered his gaze to her. There was no boast, no arrogance, only the raw certainty of a man who knew what was right. "I do not leave those in need," he said. His voice was calm, yet unyielding. "Not when I can stop the suffering. Not when it is within my hands to protect." Lena swallowed, realizing she had never seen such strength, not in the town, not in any man she had known. He had fought for her not out of duty, not out of pride, but because it was the only honorable thing to do. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening across the canyon. The three men, beaten and broken, would carry the story of this day with them, the day they underestimated the D's. Fury of a warrior defending a wounded woman. Lena finally allowed herself to breathe fully, the tightness in her chest easing for the first time since the attack. She looked at Tazhi, whose eyes scanned the canyon as though daring another threat to approach. And in that quiet, as the desert wind whispered around them, Lena understood something she hadn't before. She was no longer entirely alone. The fight had ended, but the bond forged in fire and blood was only beginning. The canyon fell silent after the last echo of hooves faded into the distance. Lena sank to her knees beside the river, chest heaving, the blanket around her shoulders damp with sweat and dust. Her hands shook as she reached for the water, dipping her fingers in and letting the coolness wash over them. Tazhi stood a few paces away, muscles still taut, the sunlight glinting off the tribal jewelry around his neck and wrists. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, every movement precise, every breath controlled. Though his chest glistened with sweat, his expression was calm, like the desert itself, unchanging, unyielding. "You saved me," Lena said finally, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had expected cruelty, betrayal, maybe even death. But not this, a man standing between her and the world with nothing but his strength and resolve. "I did what had to be done," Tazhi replied, his tone steady, but there was a shadow of something fiercer beneath it. "They will not harm you again." Lena swallowed, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. She wanted to ask more, to probe why a man like him would risk himself for a woman he barely knew, but words failed her. Instead, she focused on the river, letting the water trickle between her fingers, the sound soothing after the harsh chaos of the past days. Tazhi approached, crouching beside her. His gaze softened as he studied the bruises on her face and shoulders, the cuts along her arms. He dipped a handkerchief into the river and gently dabbed at a streak of dried blood on her cheek. Lena flinched, but did not pull away this time. "You're strong," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of truth, not flattery. "Stronger than you believe." "I don't feel strong," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel broken, scared, helpless." Tazhi's eyes darkened, the sunlight catching the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the lines of battle and life that hardened him. "Being broken does not make you weak," he said firmly. "Surviving does. Fighting back does. And you did both." Lena looked at him, and for the first time she saw not just the warrior, but a man who had endured loss, who had faced battles she could only imagine, yet who still carried compassion. The realization unsettled her, yet it also stirred something fragile within her, a spark of hope she had long thought extinguished. "You could have left me," she said softly. "Why didn't you?" Tazhi's gaze held hers, unflinching. "Because the earth would not forgive me. Because I cannot allow another to suffer when it is in my power to stop it. And because you deserved better. Her chest tightened at the words. Better. For so long, Lena had believed she deserved nothing abandoned, hunted, humiliated. And yet here was a man telling her she did. The river murmured beside them, carrying the distant echoes of the canyon wind. Tazhi leaned back on his hands, his dark hair falling loosely over his shoulders, muscles relaxed but still coiled like springs, ready for any threat. Lena studied him, the fire in his eyes matched only by the promise of unwavering protection etched into his stance. I don't even know your name, she said after a moment, her voice small, almost shy. Tazhi, he replied simply. And you are Lena. A small bitter laugh escaped her lips. I suppose names don't matter much out here. Only survival does. He nodded slowly. Survival, yes. But the land remembers names, and the deeds done to its people. His eyes flicked toward the canyon's edge, dark and thoughtful. Those who hurt you will pay. They cannot escape what they have done. Lena's gaze fell to the river again. She dipped her hands into the cool water, letting the current cleanse her fingers, her arms, the last remnants of fear. For the first time in days, she felt something close to peace, not complete. Not absolute, but enough to believe in tomorrow. The sun began to dip behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows over the sand and stone. Tazhi stood, stretching his arms over his head, every movement controlled, deliberate. Lena watched him, feeling the weight of her gratitude pressing against her chest. The day had ended, but the bond forged in the fire of battle and the quiet of the river was only beginning. Lena realized she had found more than protection in Tazhi. She had found a reason to hope again. And as the canyon cooled into twilight, a promise lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. They would face whatever came next together. Night had fallen over the canyon, the sky a deep velvet punctuated with countless stars. The river whispered softly, reflecting the pale moonlight as it wove through the canyon floor. Lena sat close to the fire, wrapped in Tazhi's blanket, still exhausted but no longer trembling with fear. The events of the past days had left her raw, bruised, and wary, but also alive. More alive than she had felt in years. Tazhi stood at the riverbank alert, every muscle coiled like a spring. His long black hair fell across his broad, bronzed shoulders, tribal jewelry catching the firelight as he moved. Though he was shirtless and exposed to the night air, he seemed impervious to cold. His presence radiating strength and protection. They're not coming back, Lena whispered. Her voice soft, almost as if saying it aloud would summon danger. She gazed at him, searching his face, trying to see what he felt. Tazhi's eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers. If they do, they will regret it. His voice was low, carrying the weight of promise, of unyielding justice. No one harms what I protect. Lena shivered not from the cold, but from the realization that she was no longer alone. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Her hands rested on the blanket at her chest, feeling the warmth, feeling him. She wanted to speak, to tell him what she felt, but the words lodged in her throat. She was not used to kindness, and trust was a foreign language. Tazhi walked back to the fire, crouching beside her. He did not speak immediately, simply studied her with eyes that had seen decades of hardship, yet still held the capacity for empathy. You've been through much, he said finally. But the land does not forgive, nor does it forget. Those who struck you will carry the memory of what they have done, and you will carry a different memory, the memory of survival, of strength, of standing through the storm. Lena's lips quivered. I don't know how to thank you. You've saved me more than once. You've given me hope. Tazhi's dark eyes softened, but the firelight still etched strength into every line of his face. Hope is yours to keep, he said. It was always there. You only needed to survive long enough to find it again. She swallowed hard, realizing that she had indeed survived, that she had fought, bled, and endured, and that Tazhi had not merely protected her body, but had reminded her of her own spirit. For a long while, they sat in silence, listening to the river and the wind. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, a witness to the bond, forged in fire, blood, and courage. Suddenly, movement at the canyon entrance caught their eyes. Lena stiffened. Shadows shifted, horses' hooves raised faint dust. Tazhi rose instantly, muscles rippling under his bronzed skin. Bow at the ready. But as the riders emerged into the firelight, Lena's heart skipped. It was not danger that approached, it was a small group of townspeople, hesitant, their faces etched with fear and respect. One of the men stepped forward. We heard what happened," he said. "We were wrong to leave her, to attack her. She belongs to this land, and no one should have touched her." Lena's breath caught, her chest tightening. The anger, fear, and humiliation of the past days rose within her, but so did a strange, cautious relief. Justice had not come in their hands, but it had been enforced by Tazhi. The townspeople stepped back, bowing slightly. Lena looked at Tazhi, who had lowered his bow, the tension in his body easing. He glanced at her, a subtle nod of reassurance. "Let them leave," he said quietly. "Their time has passed." As the dust settled, Lena rose slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She felt a strength she had never known, a power born not from revenge, but from survival and the unwavering protection of someone who had chosen to stand with her. Tazhi extended a hand. Lena took it, feeling the solid, unyielding strength of his grip. The firelight danced across his features, casting shadows that mingled with the promise in his eyes. "You saved me," she said softly. "And you have reminded me," he replied, voice calm but resolute, "that even in this harsh world, we fight not only for survival, but for what is right. That is the bond we share now." Lena nodded, letting herself finally exhale. The river whispered, the canyon walls held their shadows, and the desert night embraced them both. The past had tried to break her, but together, she and Tazhi had forged something stronger: trust, courage, and the knowledge that some bonds are made in fire and endure beyond all threats. And as the stars glimmered overhead, Lena realized that she was no longer a victim. She was alive. She was free. And she was not alone.